Welcome to the Nutri Health Podcast, where we provide credible, no-hype health, wellness, and nutrition information that actually moves the needle towards better long-term health. Welcome to the first episode of the Nutri Health Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Erin Glenn, and I want to thank you so much for being here with us on our first episode. This podcast is going to start with a series of episodes that will help you find your food fit, a plan for how to structure your everyday eating in a way that fits with your lifestyle, preferences, health goals, budget, and more. The next 7 episodes will deep dive into different eating patterns, the Mediterranean diet, different approaches to fasting, low-carb diets, plant-based diets, and a few more, to help you understand the basis for these different eating patterns, the potential health benefits of each of these eating patterns, and why one option might be a better fit for you than another. We'll also look at how to put the eating pattern into practice if you're interested to try it out. Why are we starting with an entire series about diets? Look, I don't love the word diet because it implies restriction. When I say diet on this podcast, I'm talking about the foods you eat. That's your diet. What are you consuming as an eating pattern every day? I'm starting with this series on finding your food fit because I think a lot of people struggle with finding a pattern of eating that is sustainable, meaning they can stick with it long term, and that is a good approach for overall and long-term health. I think it's gotten exponentially harder to know what information to absorb and what to ignore with the explosion of social media and the amount of content that's out there today. And why wouldn't there be confusion? Most of us didn't take a nutrition class in high school or college, so you just kind of pick up information along the way unless you really decide to dig deeper. But this explosion of social media has taken us so far away from the basics that we forget there's just some basic stuff we need to be doing to optimize health. If you listen to my 3-minute podcast intro, I said we're here to help you nail the basics. We know about 9 out of 10 Americans aren't nailing nutrition basics. How do we know this? About 9 out of 10 of us are not considered metabolically healthy, and that's based on our blood sugar levels, triglycerides, good cholesterol, blood pressure, and waist circumference, all 5 of those things together. So if 9 out of 10 of us are not metabolically healthy, I think that leaves a lot of room for us to come back to those nutrition basics and start to shift some of our beliefs and habits around food, which is arguably the biggest single contributor to our health. I know there's a lot of flashier and more exciting tips and tricks out there today, and everyone is vying for your attention. But the truth is, you can't hack your way to a healthy diet and good metabolic health. Taking a specific supplement or doing cold plunges or drinking hydrogen water, all of those things very well may improve your health. But if you're not nailing the basics, if you don't have some foundational health habits, those things aren't going to matter. This first series is here to build a foundational understanding of some core nutrition concepts and help you explore why certain eating patterns might work better for you than what you've tried in the past. Today, we're going to take a sneak peek at what's coming up in the next 7 episodes, and then we'll review some nutrition basics that will really help you navigate future information on the podcast. So what's coming up in the next 7 episodes? Well, we've grouped different eating patterns by similarities. The next episode, episode 2, will look at 3 different eating patterns: the Mediterranean diet, the DASH diet, and the MIND diet. The Mediterranean diet is often considered one of the healthiest diets you can follow, and it's a preferred eating pattern of a large number of nutrition professionals and health organizations around the world. The DASH diet stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension, and it's similar to the Mediterranean diet with a few tweaks to focus on addressing hypertension or high blood pressure. The MIND diet is a combination of the Mediterranean and the DASH diet. And the MIND diet is focused on your mind, as the acronym spells out. It's focused on supporting brain health and preventing neurodegenerative decline. Episode 3 will be all about fasting. There are a wide variety of ways to incorporate fasting into your lifestyle. These approaches have grown in popularity over the last 10 years or so. You may have heard of some of the different types of fasting, like intermittent fasting, time-restricted eating, alternate day fasting, and even OMAD, which stands for 1 meal a day. So we'll do an entire episode on using fasting for health and look at the evidence for different fasting approaches and how these affect hormone levels, weight loss, fat loss, organ health, and more. Episode 4 will be all about plant-based diets. These are your vegan, vegetarian, flexitarian, lacto-ovo-vegetarian, all the different variations of plant-based diets. We'll examine the potential health benefits and some important considerations regarding nutrients that require special attention if you're thinking about going plant-based or if you already consume a plant-based diet. Episode 5 will look at low-carb approaches, including diets like South Beach, Zone, Atkins that promote reducing carbohydrates, but are not as restrictive as a ketogenic diet. The ketogenic diet will get its own episode 6 of this series, because there are a lot of points to cover that are specific to these ketogenic diets. And I want people to understand the differences between some of the lower carbohydrate approaches and the extreme end of the ketogenic diet. It's hard to sustain a ketogenic diet long term, and I'm not promoting the use of the ketogenic diet, but because of its popularity and some diehard supporters, we're going to cover it from a scientific perspective so you can understand what it is, why someone might choose to follow a ketogenic diet, and the potential health benefits and risks. We'll look at whole food-based approaches in episode 7, diets like Whole30 and ancestral eating patterns like paleo and primal. And we'll finish in episode 8 with a variety of somewhat less popular approaches or more niche diets that still have some good support. For each eating pattern, we will look at what's the history of the eating pattern? Where did this pattern start? Is it a particular person? Is it the way an entire population eats? What are the general principles of the eating pattern? Are there foods required or restricted? Are there any timing-related elements, such as the eating window in time-based eating? Are there any macronutrient targets, such as specific amounts or percentages of carbohydrates, protein, and or fat that you're aiming for? So we'll talk about all of that and the scientifically validated health benefits that have been shown and in what populations. We'll discuss the evidence of each of these eating patterns and any effects they have on health outcomes of interest like body weight, body fat, muscle mass, organ health, inflammation, immunity, brain health, and mental health. We'll look at whether this eating pattern is more or less beneficial in people with certain conditions like diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular disease, or in certain populations like men, women, aging populations. We'll review what could be potential nutrition shortfalls or things to watch out for when eating in a certain pattern. An easy example of this is vegans and the need to ensure they're getting enough vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is mainly only found in animal products, so vegans, by nature not consuming animal products, need to pay special attention to make sure they're getting adequate levels of this vitamin, either through supplementation or fortified foods like nutritional yeast. Are there any health risks of following a particular eating pattern or considerations based on age, health status, or other factors? And lastly, we'll provide a general how-to if you're interested to try one of the patterns we discuss so that you have the tools to try it out if it's safe for you to do so. What are the popular foods that are consumed or avoided in this pattern? What does a typical few days of eating in this pattern look like? What are the pantry and grocery staples that you're going to need if you're planning to eat in this pattern? I know each episode will provide a wealth of information if you're interested in exploring a particular eating pattern and finding what works best for you and your health needs, lifestyle preferences, and more. So please check those out as they drop over the next 7 weeks and interact with us on social media, especially if you have questions. Please leave those for us on any related social media posts or on our YouTube channel. You can find us at Nuchi Health, Nuchi Health, on your favorite social platforms. Now, for the rest of today's episode, we want to cover some of those nutrition basics that will get us all on the same page with a lot of the terminology and foundational concepts you'll hear in the upcoming episodes. Anytime we talk about nutrition, we talk about terms like calories, macronutrients, and micronutrients. So let's define these. Calories are just a unit of energy, and the calories we think of in food are technically kilocalories. So sometimes you'll see people abbreviate the calories of food as kcal. That is short for kilo, K, calorie. And a kilocalorie represents the amount of heat needed to raise the temperature of 1 kilogram of water, which is 1 liter of water, by 1 degree Celsius. Now, that doesn't really matter for what we'll be talking about. What you need to know is that a calorie is how we will talk about the energy provided by foods and by diets. It's how we talk about the energy or calories a person needs each day based on their general needs and their physical activity level. And it's how we think about energy balance. If you're looking to gain, lose, or maintain your body weight, all of this is based roughly on how many calories are coming in from foods and beverages and what energy is being expended by the body with your metabolic rate and any physical activity you do throughout the day. Generally, if you consume about 2,000 calories in a day from your food and beverages, and you expend about 2,000 calories based on your basal metabolic rate and your physical activity, you would be in a neutral energy balance where you are neither gaining nor losing weight. You're maintaining your body weight in neutral energy balance. If you consumed more than 2,000 calories per day, over time, you would generally gain weight. And if you consumed less than 2,000 calories per day, you would be in negative energy balance and generally lose weight over time. A lot of our nutrition recommendations and nutrition labels are based on a 2,000 calorie a day diet, and that's very generic. Obviously, not all humans require the same amount of calories per day. The number of calories needed per day to gain, lose, or maintain body weight will depend on a variety of factors, such as your current weight, your muscle mass, potential underlying health conditions, your gender, genetics, lots of other stuff. We'll get into calculating your caloric needs a little bit later in this episode. Next, let's talk about where calories come from. There are 3 macronutrients in food. Those are fat, protein, and carbohydrates. Each of those macronutrients have different and important functions in our bodies, and there are also many different types or subcategories of those macronutrients. Let's look at fats first. Fat has 9 calories of energy per gram. So if you see a nutrition label that a food has 5 grams of fat, 5 times 9 is 45. 45 calories in a serving of that food are coming from the fat. Fat has the most calories per gram of any of the macronutrients. So the energy density, how much energy, how many calories a gram of fat provides, is over twice that of proteins and carbohydrates. That's why we have to be a little bit careful with fat consumption. We definitely want to include healthy fats, which come from natural sources like certain oils, nuts, seeds, avocados, fatty fish. But we want to avoid unhealthy fats, like those from things like processed meats and processed foods, because gram for gram, we get a lot of calories from fat, and it can be easy for those to add up quickly. We generally bucket fats into unhealthy or healthy that can be thought of as saturated fat being unhealthy and unsaturated fats being healthy. And with just about everything in nutrition these days, there are people who will argue against these designations, but we'll get into some of that debate in our upcoming episodes. So unsaturated healthy fats are found in those natural sources like avocados, nuts, seeds, fatty fish, and then also oils like olive oil, avocado oil, and some other vegetable oils. You may have heard of monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. These are also called MUFAs and PUFAs for short. Those are all unsaturated healthy fats, and we need to consume those for many important bodily functions, such as our cellular membrane structure and function, the synthesis of hormones, absorption of certain vitamins, brain function, our inflammatory response, and a lot more. We need fats in our diets. We just need to make sure that we're consuming the right forms of fats to optimize health. The next class of macronutrients is protein. Protein is critical for basically every function in our bodies. It makes up structural components like our connective tissue and muscle. Enzymes that fuel metabolic reactions in the body are proteins. Hormones like insulin are proteins. They are critical parts of our immune system, cells, gene expression, and so much more. Unlike fat, which had that 9 calories per gram, protein only gives us 4 calories per gram. Proteins are made up of building blocks called amino acids. There are 20 amino acids relevant to humans, and they are further classified as essential, non-essential, or conditionally essential. Essential means we can't make them in our bodies, so we have to obtain them from our diet. Non-essential amino acids can be made in our bodies, and conditionally essential means the body can produce them, but there may be situations where the body can't produce enough to be sufficient for our needs. So more needs to be obtained from the diet in those cases. We get protein from a variety of sources, but animal sources tend to be higher in protein, things like meat, fish, dairy, eggs. These protein sources also provide a complete source of protein, which means they contain all 9 essential amino acids in amounts required for human health, whereas plant-based protein sources are often lacking in 1 or more essential amino acid, making them what we call incomplete protein sources. Still, you can get plenty of those amino acid building blocks of proteins from plant sources alone if you're eating a good variety of plants. There are also a few plant-based proteins that have all the essential amino acids in adequate amounts, and we'll cover what those are in our vegetarian and vegan eating pattern episode. Okay, the third macronutrient is carbohydrates, or sometimes called carbs for short. Carbohydrates cover a group of saccharides, which include sugars, starches, and cellulose. Like protein, carbohydrate is going to give us 4 calories per gram, but a special case is fiber, which is also a type of carbohydrate. Because our bodies can't digest fiber, and we only get the energy from fiber when it's fermented by our gut microbiota, 1 gram of fiber only contributes about 2 calories. So, not only is fiber great for moving waste through our system, for feeding our gut microbiota, increasing satiety, regulating blood sugar, it also contains fewer calories than regular carbohydrates. It's important to understand that carbohydrates are not bad, but there are certain types of carbohydrates we want to put more focus on in our diets. There are two main types of carbohydrates: simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are basically just chains of sugars. So the terms simple and complex refers to how complicated those chains of sugars are. Simple carbohydrates are going to be either single sugar molecules or two sugar molecules put together in a chain. The most common simple carb or simple sugar is table sugar, like what you would put in your coffee or use in baking. Complex carbohydrates have more sugars in the chain. The chain becomes more complex, and therefore it takes the body longer to break those complex chains down into individual sugar molecules during digestion. So, what does that mean for us? It means when you ingest a simple carbohydrate, especially alone without other macronutrients like protein and fat, the body is going to break down that simple sugar quickly, absorb it quickly, and this is going to result in an increase in the sugar in our blood, also called blood glucose. On the other hand, complex carbohydrates take the body longer to break those chains and release the sugars. So when you consume a complex carbohydrate, like those found in whole foods like beans, whole grains, legumes, fruits, vegetables, the body takes longer to access those sugars, and therefore we get what's called a lower and slower blood sugar response. So between those two options, simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates, obviously we want to focus more on the complex carbs that are going to come with lots of other beneficial nutrients like fiber, vitamins, and minerals. Okay, so we've got our three macronutrients: fat, protein, and carbohydrates. We want to focus on getting healthy fats in our diets from sources like fatty fish, nuts, seeds, avocados, and oils like olive oil. We need healthy fats for our cell membranes, brain health, hormones, inflammatory response, absorption of certain nutrients, and more. We need protein and the amino acid building blocks of protein for almost every function in our body, from muscles to enzymes to hormones to our immune system. We need a variety of those essential amino acids that our body can't make, and we can get those from animal sources or plant sources. We just have additional considerations to think about if we're going fully plant-based for our protein. And lastly, carbohydrates. We have the simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates. Complex carbs are found in more of those whole food sources like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. And carbohydrates provide an energy source, while those complex carbs provide vitamins, minerals, and fiber to keep our digestive system and gut microbiota happy. Let's talk about what happens in our body when we ingest each of these macronutrients. Anytime you eat a meal, the body responds by releasing a variety of enzymes to break down the food into smaller components that can be used by the body. So examples are breaking down proteins into those amino acid building blocks, or breaking down carbohydrates into the individual sugar molecules that can be converted to the body's form of energy, ATP. There are also hormonal responses to food that vary by the composition of the meal. Insulin is one of these hormones. So insulin is released in response to an increase in blood sugar, and it helps the sugar from your blood get into your cells to be used for energy. So as a general rule of thumb, if you don't have diabetes, keeping blood glucose and insulin levels on the lower end is ideal. There are certainly cases where blood sugar getting too low is harmful, but for most of us, the goal is to avoid large swings in blood sugar, which generally happen in response to consuming those simple carbohydrates or simple sugars. If we eat a simple carbohydrate like putting a teaspoon of table sugar in our coffee or eating a few pieces of candy, those sugars will break down pretty quickly and enter our bloodstream, which translates to an increase in blood sugar. That increase in blood sugar triggers the release of insulin to help you get that sugar out of your blood and into your cells to be used for energy. On the other hand, if you consumed a pure fat source, so like a tablespoon of olive oil, this would not increase blood sugar or insulin because there's no sugar or carbohydrates in that pure fat source. Protein is kind of in between fat and carbohydrates. It can increase blood glucose and insulin slightly in some cases, and that's because certain amino acids can be converted into glucose, but this effect is going to be much smaller than consuming carbohydrates, and especially simple carbohydrates. We'll talk much more in depth in the upcoming episodes about eating patterns that vary in the amounts of these macronutrients and how that affects our physiological responses to the food. But for today, I hope you're clear on those 3 macronutrients found in food: fat, protein, and carbohydrates, the common sources of each of those macronutrients, especially our healthier options for each of them, and what they generally do in your body. Now, for the last of those 3 basics, we had calories, macronutrients, and micronutrients. Micronutrients, as the name implies, are nutrients that you need in small amounts. These are your vitamins and minerals. A lot of the vitamins are letters, so you have vitamin A, C, D, E, K, and a whole group of B vitamins. Minerals include calcium, magnesium, iron, zinc, many others. We're not going to go into too much detail on micronutrients today, but we'll touch more on some of these as we go through the next 7 episodes, especially focusing on micronutrients that might be lacking in certain eating patterns and require special attention. Before we wrap up this intro episode, I want to touch on some generalized recommendations for finding your daily calorie needs. If you've never done this before, we will post a tutorial on our YouTube channel on how to calculate your energy needs using some of the calculator references we'll provide in the show notes. There are different equations to estimate what's called your basal metabolic rate, BMR, which is the number of calories your body would need each day if it was completely at rest in order to sustain itself. How many calories per day would your body need if you laid in a bed all day and you didn't move just to keep its normal processes running? That's your basal metabolic rate. Then to calculate your actual daily energy needs, you multiply that number, your basal metabolic rate, by an activity factor that's based on your physical activity level. So that will be a higher number if you're more physically active. Your basal metabolic rate multiplied by your activity factor gives you your estimated daily caloric intake needs to maintain your current weight. That would mean you were in neutral energy balance. So if you put your information in one of those calculators and it spits out a number of 1,800 calories, if you consumed about 1,800 calories per day, you should maintain about the same body weight. If you consumed more than that 1,800 calories a day, you'd be in positive energy balance and could generally expect to gain weight over time. If you regularly consumed less than your 1,800 calories per day, you would be in negative energy balance. Now, typically plans advise about 500 calories less per day, up to 1,000 calories less than your daily needs, depending on circumstances, if you're aiming for healthy and sustainable weight loss. So those numbers, 500 to 1,000 calorie reduction per day, should result in weight loss of about 1 to 2 pounds per week. But it's always best to work with a healthcare professional like a registered dietitian for personalized nutrition guidance if you're looking to lose weight. I previously mentioned nutrition labels are based on a 2,000 calorie per day diet, but you may need 1,800 per day or 2,500. It depends on many factors. So if you've never done this exercise before, find those links to the daily calorie needs estimators we'll put in the show notes and find your number because that will be really useful to have as we move through the next 7 episodes. Another thing that will be useful to know is how to read a nutrition label. Now, I'm not a calorie counter, but I do think it's important to know approximately how many calories you're getting from various things you eat on a regular basis. If you have no idea how many calories you consume and you have a certain health goal, particularly related to energy balance, you need to have some general idea of what you're consuming. And reading the nutrition label is how you're going to be able to do that. Now, you could also use any number of the nutrition trackers that are out there, but those may or may not be accurate. So a nutrition label of the actual food you're consuming is the best way to know what you're actually getting. We are posting a separate tutorial on our Nuchi Health YouTube channel on how to read a nutrition label. So if you need to brush up on that, please find that in our tutorials. And I will note the FDA implemented updates to the nutrition label back around 2020. So it might be good to take a quick watch of that video just to understand the latest updates. Okay, we just covered a lot of information today. I hope that anything you weren't previously familiar with is a little more clear now. If you still have any questions related to today's episode or questions about any of those eating patterns I mentioned that are coming up in the series, please include them in the comments section of our YouTube or social media posts, and we will try to answer as many of those as possible. We need some structure in our diet in order to be successful and meet our goals. If we don't think or have a plan for what we're going to eat each day, each week, we're kind of setting ourselves up for failure. But with just a few minutes of planning each week and a food structure that allows you flexibility for your preferences, that provides the nutrition your body needs, and that's sustainable for you, that's going to put you on a path to feeling better and improving your long-term health. Lastly, I want you to thank yourself for being here, for prioritizing your health and wellness. Thank you so much for being here, for your desire to learn and improve your health, and for letting us be part of that health journey. I'll see you soon.